we come, walking down the street.
They were four young men hired by Hollywood to play a make-believe band.
Mickey, Peter, Mike, and Davy. What young men in America wouldn't have given their eye teeth to get that gig?
We're the Monkees.
Hey, we're the Monkees.
The Monkees is a bigger phenomenon than I'd ever planned or hoped for myself.
They did not want to just hire four actors to play parts and pretend.
Take the last train to Pottsville and I'll meet you at the station.
We were 19, 20, 21 years old. We weren't thinking. We were just doing.
This is TV, partner. This is the great American narcotic machine at work.
I'm not your stepping stone.
The Monkees were instant international superstars.
When the Monkees came to England, the Beatles gave a party.
But their critics dubbed them the Prefab Four.
The local rock group down the street is trying hard to learn their song.
The Monkees were not allowed to play their own instruments.
I didn't have any ambivalence about how the music was being made. I hated it.
Another Pleasant Valley Sunday.
They fought to make their own records, seizing control in a high-stakes musical mutiny.
I smashed my fist through the wall. I said, yeah, well, that could have been your face.
The year that I got fired, I had the Monkees outselling the Beatles.
Then the fictional Monkees became a real live band.
I've often equated it to Leonard Nimoy really becoming a Vulcan.
This Vulcan line, Mickey, give it up for God's sake.
Look out, here comes tomorrow.
They won the battle to be their own band, but the victory led to their destruction.
I mean, whoever plays Superman shouldn't be jumping off buildings, thinking he can fly either.
When the 60s ended, the Monkees were history.
Well, that's show business.
They weren't hip, they weren't cool, but 2 decades later, they were back.
You always say you like my style.
We had sold-out concerts all over the place.
It's just so odd to me that a girl my age would be attracted to my father.
Listen to the band.
Then the Monkees' comeback fell victim to bad blood and bruised egos.
We've all quit at one time or another now.
Now, the real-life adventures of the most beloved made-up band in rock and roll history. The comedy and tragedy of the Monkees, behind the music.
Love is only true in fairy tales.
In the fall of 1966, young Americans turned on their TV sets and tuned in the comic adventures of four mop-top musicians called the Monkees.
Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer.
The Monkees made their debut at a revolutionary musical moment in time.
The music scene in the mid-60s was at a great crossroads. 1966 is when it all went from pop to rock. If you were 14 and under, you weren't ready for Sgt. Pepper, you weren't ready for Pet Sounds, the Monkees were king.
Oh, I could hide neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings.
In 1967, in one single unimaginable year, the Monkees sold 35 million records.
The Monkees outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined in the year 1967.
Cheer up, sleepy Jean.
But no matter how many records they sold, Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork weren't a real band. They just played one on TV.
Homecoming queen.
Ultimately, the Monkees was not a group. It was a television show about a group, an imaginary group, a fictitious group that didn't exist.
The human mind is almost incapable of distinguishing between the real and the vividly imagined experience.
At some point, the line between fantasy and reality definitely disappeared. And you could argue that, yes, we did become a group because we went out on the road and we played all our concerts and we did record in the studio.
I will melt your heart again.
The real interesting story, I think, behind the Monkees is how this, Pinocchio really came alive at one point.
Come with me, leave yesterday behind, and take a giant step outside your mind.
We'd like to thank the Beatles for starting it all up for us.
In 1964, the Beatles arrived in America, and their first film, A Hard Day's Night, captured the high spirits and hysteria of Beatlemania. Television producer Bert Schneider was inspired by A Hard Day's Night. He teamed with producer Bob Rafelson to create a TV series about a comic rock quartet. Rafelson and Schneider sold the Monkees to Screen Gems. On September 9th, 1965, an ad in the Hollywood trade papers drew 437 young hopefuls to try out for the Monkees. Musical talent was not the primary consideration.
It turns out that there were 2 actors hired and 2 musicians, but they were looking for personalities so that the fans could adore one of those personalities.
In October, after weeks of auditions, 4 final candidates emerged. One was a 19-year-old Englishman already under contract to Screen Gems.
How did you get into show business? How did that all start out?
Oh, I used to act at school and whatnot, and they said I should be an actor, but I wanted to be a jockey. They couldn't find a spot for me. And then the monkey thing started to develop, and I was just perfect for that.
Davy Jones' quick wit and English charm sealed the deal.
What bag are you in?
What?
What bag are you in?
Bag?
Yeah.
I don't get that.
All right, let me ask you something. I mean, like, do you make a folk sound or a rock sound or anything like that?
I make a terrible sound.
20-year-old Southern California boy Mickey Dolenz had already had a taste of stardom. First as the 10-year-old lead on a TV series called Circus Boy, and later as the frontman for a small-time band.
I had already been in a rock group called Mickey and the One-Nighters, playing rhythm guitar and singing. But most of my experience was acting.
Peter Tork was a 21-year-old folk musician recently relocated from New York City's Greenwich Village. Peter was recommended to Bob Rafelson by his friend Stephen Stills, with whom he'd played back in New York.
Bob told him, do you know anybody who looks like you, whose hair and teeth are better, who has some talent, who might work out for this? And Stephen said, yeah, my friend Peter is just the guy.
Well, you and I travel to the beat of a different drum.
22-year-old Texan Michael Nesmith was a singer-songwriter who had already released 2 singles on Columbia's Colpix label.
Why do you do this kind of business?
What's that?
Play the music.
Well, I mean,
How'd you get to
why do they call that a light? I don't know. That's just where it's at.
Well, how'd you get to it? How long ago?
About 2 years.
When they were going through all the screen tests that they had, they started calling me the guy with the wool hat. And I said, yeah, well, bring wool hat back.
Wool hat? Take the boys right over to the Riviera Country Club.
They introduced us all one day and said, you guys are the Monkees.
Let's dance on. Oh, baby, come on.
When shooting began on the pilot episode in November of '65, the 4 actors went through the motions as if they were actually playing their instruments. The fact is, they weren't. And before long, the Monkees would grow tired of faking it.
During a break in the filming, we began to play, Johnny Be Good and things like that. And the crew and the cast were up and dancing.
Give me a G.
They were an entertaining garage band, but they had nothing to do with the real music for the pilot, which was written and recorded by songwriters Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart.
Tommy and I met with Bert, and he explained to us what he wanted to do. It was basically an American Beatles on television.
Let's dance on. Oh, baby, come on.
With the series scheduled for a fall 1966 debut on NBC, director Jim Frawley encouraged a free-spirited, improvisational atmosphere on the set.
They would let us out of the dressing rooms and we'd just come blasting out there. Hey, what's happening? Camera, Davy, Peter, Mickey, oh.
We were cavorting and dropping things and playing practical jokes and driving people nuts.
But discipline was needed in the recording studio. In March of '66, Screen Gems music chief Don Kirshner was brought on board.
I got the job as music supervisor, which gave me full creative control, which means I picked the singles, I picked the songs, the producers, and the writers, and I had full control over what was released.
But the slapstick mayhem of the set carried over into the studio. On Kirshner's first day in the control room, Mickey promptly poured a Coke over Don's head.
From day one, I walked in the studio, and that famous incident where Mickey Dolenz poured Coke on me, I knew there was trouble in River City.
Mickey Dolenz didn't know who Donnie Kirshner was. We were like full of ourselves and having a great old time. But along comes Kirshner saying, no, this is the way it is, because he was the word.
I said, look, I don't want to be the heavy. I got a job. You got a TV show going on, and I got to get the show on the road.
Kirshner laid down the law. The Monkees were to sing when asked and nothing more.
I was loaded with the greatest songs around from the best writers in America, and I just felt that I could make them the biggest thing in the country.
Peter, an experienced musician, assumed he'd be a featured player on the Monkees records, but he soon learned his guitar wasn't welcome in the studio.
Go away if you're going to give us a hard time about it. I mean, Boy, that was really tough.
Undaunted by the resistance, Kirshner put his stable of young songwriters to work, and soon Boyce and Hart had penned the song that would launch the Monkees into superstardom.
The fact that the music took off as it did took everybody by, enormous surprise.
Mickey Dolenz and I were sitting outside our house, and all of a sudden, Last Train to Clarksville came on. We just went, yay!
Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station.
When Last Train to Clarksville was released in August of '66, it was an instant hit.
Oh, that's great. That's the group I'm looking for.
Their show wasn't on TV yet, but the Monkees' first single was already headed to the top of the charts.
It had all the excitement of the early Beatles. It sounded like 1964 again.
Here we come.
On September 12, 1966, the Monkees debuted on NBC. Nothing like it had ever been seen on television before.
Hey, hey, we're the Monkees.
2 months later, the Monkees' first album hit #1.
We're almost at the heights. We're nearly at the top of the heap. It's all downhill from here.
But the Monkees had little to do with the hit-making machine that had suddenly made them a pop music phenomenon. Coming up, Monkey Mania.
Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer.
I was 20 years old, stoned, and a millionaire with Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles just going...
Later, the Prefab Four faced the music.
People said to me, is it true you didn't play your own music? Nobody played their own music.
Child, when you woke up and morning smiled, this time you felt like you did then.
Just 2 months after the Monkees TV show debuted in the fall of '66, young America was already in the grip of Monkey Mania. The Monkees' first album topped the charts in November, selling over 3 million copies in just 90 days.
Very early on, the press began to report with genuine alarm that we were not a real band.
The reaction when people say you don't play your own instruments and don't go?
I don't really think there's any reason to talk about that because that's it's ridiculous.
It wasn't that the Monkees didn't play their own instruments. The Monkees were not allowed to play their own instruments. If we'd have had a choice in the matter, it would have only been the four of us right from the get-go.
But the Monkees didn't have a choice. Screen Gems music chief Don Kirshner was calling the musical shots.
Mike, Peter, Mickey, and Davey were really the luckiest guys in America to get on television, to have hit records. Forget who produced it, who didn't produce it. What is real and what is not? We have one job, and that's to entertain people, and we did it.
I wanna be free.
The Monkees' music was really being played by the best studio musicians in New York and Hollywood. But the two musical Monkees found Kirshner's bubblegum hard to swallow.
I didn't have any ambivalence about how the music was being made. I hated it. Pure and simple.
I was a wreck. I was fit to be tied because of the music. And I liked Last Train to Clarksville, and I loved the way David sang. But the rest of it was just hopeless junk.
Without any strings to tie me down.
The show's producers, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, were sympathetic, and Nesmith began producing his own songs.
Mike Nesmith wound up with the songs basically as a peace offering, to give him a song in the album, to get him a few bucks, and to get a little peace and quiet.
I know that something very strange has happened to my brain.
Nesmith got 2 songs on the Monkees' first album, and he would have 2 more on the next. But the rest of the album tracks would be products of music supervisor Don Kirshner's Hit Factory. Kirshner brought in songwriter Jeff Barry to produce several songs, including a tune by a then unknown songwriter, Neil Diamond.
And for someone else, but not for me.
Mike Nesmith thought it was an absolute flop, and he hated it. So our relationship went steadily downhill from there.
But there would soon be no debate about the merits of Neil Diamond's new song.
It's a song of faith. Now I'm a believer.
I'm a Believer was released on November 26th. Within a month, it was the #1 single in America. Monkey Mania reached a fever pitch, so Screen Gems decided to take the Monkees' garage band act on the road.
They came and said, why don't you rehearse and see if you can actually play some of the songs that you recorded? Well, I don't think so, but we could play something.
On December 3rd, 1966, the Monkees made their concert debut before a sellout crowd in Honolulu, then set off on a 12-city tour.
We played 15,000, 18,000 seat arenas. I saw the thing firsthand at the stadiums that we played and the monkey mania that was going on, and it was just mind-boggling.
With each concert, their confidence in themselves as a real band grew.
I'm fixing to walk out there in front of 15,000 people, man. If I don't play my own instruments, I'm in a lot of trouble.
We played all by ourselves. You could argue that at that point, we became this group. Leonard Nimoy really became a Vulcan. And we got very full of ourselves, of course.
On January 15th, 1967, the Monkees were still on tour when they discovered that their second album had already been released.
Somebody goes across the street to the mall and brings us back the album. It's the first we've seen it. And there we are in JCPenney clothes on the cover.
Well, that's when Mike Nesmith and Peter Tork went crazy.
They're not expecting this record to be out. Not with these songs, not with that picture, and not with those liner notes. So they basically hit the roof.
When more of the Monkees knocked their first album off the top of the charts, the Monkees had the top 2 albums in the country, and the ensuing Monkey Mania served to escalate tensions between the band and Don Kirshner.
He wanted to control the music for the Monkees. And he also said, you know, you guys have got to sing and you got to play like we say to do it. Just get a grip, pal.
Mary, Mary, where are you going to?
I believe everybody successful has an ego, but it's like a coach. He's got to control the ball club.
No heartache spells, no longer lonely nights of waiting finally won me.
I don't want to minimize, denigrate Mike's talent, but I had a money machine rolling. It's like we're doing hip-hop or rap, and a guy comes in and he's doing classical music.
Mike and Peter were very upset, and I could understand why, because they were good musicians. Then the other side of me said, wait a minute, we're actors playing the parts of rock and roll musicians. Oh. All of a sudden, you want to do the music and write the songs?
The conflict came to a head in late January. The 4 Monkees, Kirshner, his lawyer Herb Molis, and Screen Gems music executive Lester Sill all gathered for a meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
I was really psyched about the Beverly Hills meeting. I had 4 checks for $250,000. I had the gold records, and that turned into a fiasco because they were really laying in wait for me.
Mike and Peter confronted Donnie Kirshner and Herb Molis, his lawyer.
And I walked in with a song I believed in, called Sugar Sugar.
And Mike Nesmith said he wasn't going to record these songs. And Herb Molis, the lawyer,
wagged the contract at me. And he said, well, you've got a contract, and this is the contract that you've got. And I smashed my fist through the wall. I said, yeah, well, that could have been your face.
He actually smashed the wall with his fist. I thought, oh my God.
I just lost my temper. It was for a few seconds.
It was the weirdest thing, and I went, wow. And Lester Sill and I walked out of that place, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I said, we're on the down now, aren't we? He said, yeah. He said, this is the beginning of the end. And it was.
Listen to the band.
Coming up, the inmates take over the asylum.
2 albums, #1, 3 singles, #1. I never dreamed of being fired.
And later, a phenomenon is canceled.
Look out. You could feel it, the vibes, you know, the Monkees, you know, hey, hey, we were the Monkees. You know, it was coming to an end.
In February of 1967, the battle for the musical future of the Monkees was on. The conflict between the Monkees and music supervisor Don Kirshner had come to a showdown.
We struck, mainly because of Mike.
We finally just said, go away. Nobody's going to work with you. Please go away.
Either you let us play or we quit. Who's stopping you? Go ahead and play. Play all you want.
Producers of the Monkees TV series sided with the stars of the show, and Kirshner was forced to step back.
And it was true.
And Mike, Davey, Mickey, and Peter got the chance to make the next album on their own.
And we started then controlling our destiny, you know, every single note.
That is really akin to letting a passenger who has lots of miles as a passenger on an airplane decide that he wants to fly the plane.
All men must have someone.
The TV show went on hiatus so the Monkees could focus on recording their third album called Headquarters.
Headquarters, in a way, was our first album of this imaginary group that became a group.
Michael Nesmith brought in 24-year-old Chip Douglas to serve as their producer.
It was Michael's choice. I wanted Steve Stills.
Peter Tork was actually pretty good on the classical piano and the picking guitar, and I thought, well, then we'll let Mickey drum. I'll play bass, Michael play rhythm guitar, and David hung in there on the tambourine, and we went about it in that manner.
3/4 of the way through it, we were starting to think, maybe it's better if we don't try to do this, since we don't really work that well as a band. We learned to play loud, but we hadn't necessarily learned to play really good.
Mickey had been playing drums for only a year, and compared to the top-notch pros they were replacing, the Monkees were studio novices. Headquarters would take 6 weeks to record, a long time by the standards of the day.
Professional musicians would do those tracks in 3-5 takes, and we took 30 and 50 takes. But we got them done. All we ever wanted to do was be our own sidemen. We would have preferred Don Kirshner to stay in place. We knew he had a golden ear. We knew he knew what he was doing. But Don saw our need to be in the studio as a personal affront.
Egos were getting bruised. I had the controls. I was winning, and people were jealous of it.
We wanted to be on the B-side of the next single and on the albums thereafter.
But Don Kirshner had plans of his own. And in February, he released a single with a Neil Diamond song on one side and a Jeff Barry tune on the other.
Don Kirshner had that authority to do whatever he wanted to do, in my understanding.
Diamond's A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You shot to number 2. Don Kirshner proved he still had a golden touch, but his relationship with the Monkees was badly tarnished.
I knew there was a situation where I may be fired because of it, but my commitment to the artist and to Neil was more important to me.
It's a little bit me, it's a little bit you.
The Monkees claimed Kirshner had overstepped his authority by releasing the single without their consent. And once again, the show's producers sided with the Monkees.
They called me in the office one day, the heads at Screen Gems, and they said, we want our creative control back. And I said, there's no way I'm going to give you back creative control after the job I did. They used the issue of the boys are very unhappy, and if the boys are unhappy, they're not going to work.
After putting out 2 #1 albums in a row, Don Kirshner was fired.
One day I walked into my office and I saw 2 security guards with the office locked, and they escorted me out of the building.
The dismissal of the man with the golden ear was a fateful move for the Monkees.
I remember when the answers seemed so clear.
From there on, they gained their independence, but they lost the support system. Without Don Kirshner's involvement, you really don't have the hit songs. And if you don't have the hit songs, it's a completely forgettable TV show, and I don't think we'd be talking about it still.
It was easy then to tell truth from lies, selling out from compromise.
I think the history books will show that they were a television group that needed great songs, and they got them. And I was the creative music supervisor, and when everything becomes #1, I think you do your job.
Only shades of gray.
The Monkees finally made an album on their own terms, free of Kirshner's control. And on May 16th, 1967, Headquarters was released.
When the album came out, we didn't see any big articles in the paper. Monkees play their own instruments at last.
By the end of June, Headquarters hit #1.
For 1 week. And then Sgt. Pepper's came out the following week, displaced the Monkees, and the Beatles and the Monkees were #1 and #2 for that whole summer.
And at Heathrow Airport, there was no mistaking that Peter, Davy, Mike and Mickey were on their way.
In July, the high-flying Monkees flew to London for an appearance on the BBC's Top of the Pops. And more importantly, an audience with England's rock royalty, the Beatles.
I've never felt that I was a peer in any way to the Beatles.
The four kings of EMI sitting stately on the floor.
I remember very distinctly in 1967 when the Monkees visited the Beatles in London. And this was billed as a summit meeting. Wow, the Monkees from America meet the Beatles from England.
The Fab Four threw a party for the Prefab Four.
There were some snooty critics that couldn't understand it. How could the high and mighty Sgt. Pepper Beatles like the bubblegum Monkees?
When I started hanging out with Sean, he got it. He said the Monkees are like the Marx Brothers, which is exactly what we were. We were the Marx Brothers with music.
Partying with the Beatles, the Monkees were on top of the world, but the ground was slipping beneath their feet.
It's the beginning of the end because the other records sold 5 million and Ed Gorder sold 3 million, so they lost 2 million in sales.
They had already begun recording their fourth album, but it was not the united process that Headquarters had been.
Other musicians were involved, and the guys weren't all there at the same time.
We couldn't do a television show, movies, and make records. That just wasn't in the program. It was like, we have the creative control, why don't we use the creative control and get the best people that can play it that we can find.
They really were just replicating the Kirshner model, but doing it in kind of a less successful way.
The local rock group down the street is trying hard to learn their song.
In the fall of '67, the second season of the Monkees TV series began on NBC.
Another Pleasant Valley Sunday.
I knew at the beginning of the second season there was no way that this was going to be sustained.
You only had one season for the fans to get to know the guys, and then you came back next year and they were looking a little more psychedelic.
Suddenly the Monkees were making fun of themselves and not taking themselves quite so seriously in their parts.
Hey, that's a groovy button. What does it say?
Love is the ultimate trip.
That's a nice thought.
That's a nice button, would it?
Let's go again.
One thing had not changed about the TV show, its ability to help launch a hit song.
Oh, I could hide neath the wings.
Daydream Believer topped the singles chart in early December, and the Monkees scored their fourth consecutive #1 album.
Daydream Believer and homecoming queen.
When shooting on the second TV season wrapped at the end of the year, the Monkees and producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider looked to conquer new territory in 1968.
When they started talking about a movie, we knew we did not want to do another episode of the TV show.
So we all got together. Myself, Mickey, Peter, Mike, Bert and Bob, and Jack Nicholson.
Enamored with Nicholson, Rafelson had hired the aspiring actor to help write and produce the Monkees movie.
We all sat around talking into this little tape recorder. Everybody stoned on their butts and just talking for days about what we wanted to do and what we didn't want to do in this motion picture.
On February 15th, 1968, filming began with Rafelson as director. Titled Head, the movie was a radical departure from the TV show.
I think Bob and Bert had their own agenda about turning the whole thing on its head and exposing Hollywood and the Monkees and fantasy and reality and the war in Vietnam.
There was a darkness to the piece that dealt with the death of a phenomena.
In truth, the Monkees phenomenon was dying. In June of '68, 5 months before the premiere of Head, the Monkees TV series was canceled.
I don't think anybody could have sustained a third year, and when the producer said we're not going to do another season, that was fine with me.
I think it was a lot of things. The whole thing about the music and everybody thinking we could go off and we could all be huge stars on our own individually. You know, a lot of ego involved and Bert and Bob, wanted to go off and do movies, and they were making Easy Rider at the time.
Easy Rider was made because Rafelson and Schneider made a lot of money with the Monkees. The Monkees were kind of left holding the bag, the cultural bag, after it was over.
On November 6, 1968, Head premiered in New York. Unlike A Hard Day's Night, which had inspired it all 4 years earlier, the Monkees movie was a box office disaster.
It wasn't the movie the Monkees should have made at the time.
It was an R rating, so our real Monkee fans couldn't even get in the theater. And those that did looked and went, what the hell is this?
Why would the Monkees fans want to see something called Head, with the guys jumping off a bridge, committing suicide in the first, 2 minutes of the film?
It is my opinion that Bert and Bob really wanted to destroy us and shoot the project out of the water so that they wouldn't have anything to do. I think they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams.
The answer seemed so clear.
As the year came to a close, Peter Tork quit the Monkees. The official reason was exhaustion. Privately, he'd grown tired of being a monkey.
The interest was waning on every front, and I just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. That was it, not with a bang, but with a whimper, or not even that. Not with a bang or a whimper, but a shrug.
Only shades of gray.
Coming up, the Monkees bottom out.
When you start off at the very top, it's hard to come down.
And later, the Prefab Four's marathon revival.
The agent came and he said, guys, we're moving up in the world. And we started playing arenas.
Mary, Mary.
When Behind the Music continues. The Monkees entered 1969 as a trio. After the cancellation of their TV series and the failure of their movie Head, Peter Tork quit the group. And without a weekly TV series to showcase their music, the Monkees were falling off the charts. The next year and a half would see declining record sales and a dwindling number of band members.
I could love you forever.
Michael Nesmith left the band in the spring of 1970.
Wish that I could.
And that summer, Mickey and Davey decided to put the Monkees out of their misery.
You made my heart sing.
For Davey, it was rough going from heartthrob to has-been. Monkees' fame cast a long shadow, and he struggled for years to carve out his own identity.
It was weird. It's sort of like, but I am the king. There's no place to go. There was nothing to do.
Mickey suffered from post-Monkee withdrawal, too.
I think I slept for 2 years because it was pretty intense. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to work, and I just partied.
Well, I think for a while he did get depressed because suddenly from this hive of activity, nothing was really happening. And he spent quite a lot of time on the couch.
She's a wonderful lady and she's mine, all mine.
The wonderful lady by Mickey's side, through thick and thin, was his wife Samantha. The two had been married since the summer of '68.
It's been a long time since the party and the room is in a mess.
And Mickey and I used to love to give parties. Mickey had a recording studio in the house. So the parties usually used to end up with jam sessions down in the studio.
And he'd have Ringo Starr over and John Lennon and Harry Nilsson.
Harry would call me up and say, let's go have lunch, and I'd find myself waking up 3 days later in a massage parlor in Phoenix. And go, how did I get here?
For I love you and I know you love me.
Mickey and Samantha's daughter Amy was just a toddler in the early '70s. She grew up in the midst of an endless party.
I remember, waking up in the morning to go to school and, there'd still be the party going on from the night before, and I'd be, were you guys here just last night?
There was a lot of craziness going on at the time.
Post-Monkee life got craziest for Peter Tork. By 1971, he had spent or given away all of his Monkee money and split up with his girlfriend, the mother of his young daughter. Then, while driving cross-country, things went from bad to worse.
Stopped in El Paso, Texas, went sightseeing in Juarez, came back across the border, and I'd forgot about the $3 worth of hashish in my pocket. And got popped by customs, and wow!
Peter's $3 worth of hash earned him a 3-month stay at the El Reno Federal Penitentiary in Oklahoma.
It was a little difficult the first day I was there to go to a meal and have the walls lined with people wanting to watch the TV star in jail. And so that's him, huh? Don't look like much to me. Oh, God. But, you know, I made a friend or two and managed to avoid getting the totally kicked out of me. And, you know, basically survived it.
Upon his release, Peter returned to Los Angeles, where he found work as a teacher in a private school. Meanwhile, for Mickey Dolenz, the party raged on.
He was still running around a little bit, maybe a lot. And I just didn't want to turn into somebody who was bitter.
By 1975, his storybook marriage to Samantha ended in divorce. Mickey was devastated, but a new dose of monkey mania would help to ease his pain.
Here we come, walking down the street.
That year, former Monkees songwriters Boyce and Hart recruited Mickey and Davy Jones for a revival tour.
That's a drum. Hey, hey, we're the Monkees.
We billed ourselves as the golden great hits of the Monkees show, starring Dolenz, Jones, Boyce, and Hart, the guys who sang them and the guys who wrote them.
I wanna be free.
Singing the old songs was therapeutic for Davy.
And I'd just been divorced, and so I wasn't feeling too clever. I was very unhappy. And I sort of like got out on the road and I was drinking and kissing girls and everything.
Just say goodbye.
Saying goodbye to the Monkees had been difficult for Davy.
Don't say you love me, say.
But for the fiercely independent Michael Nesmith, moving on wasn't as hard. Michael made a series of solo albums, then inherited a fortune from his mother, the inventor of liquid paper. He went on to become a pioneer in the field of music video.
I want my
MTV.
The pioneering music channel, MTV, was making history in 1985, and the Monkees were history.
In 1985, there was nothing less hip than the Monkees. The Monkees were dead.
Buzz off, Charlie! God, God.
But all that changed on February 22nd, 1986, when MTV aired a 22-hour marathon of the old Monkees television shows.
I am receiving a telepathic message to report to the television studio.
Yeah, fine. Step this way.
I don't think MTV knew of the power that they had until they saw the Monkees.
On the heels of the marathon, the Monkees, minus Michael Nesmith, embarked on a 145-show tour.
Detroit called me up and said, we sold out in the first 20 minutes. And then Chicago called me and said, we've sold 28,000 seats.
About a week or two into the tour, the agent came and he said, guys, we're moving up in the world. And we started playing arenas.
Riding the new wave of monkey mania, Arista Records released a Monkees Greatest Hits package, including a brand new Monkees single.
You always say you like my style.
That Was Then, This Is Now became the Monkees' first top 20 hit since 1968.
That was then, this is now.
But the high point of the Monkees' revival came on September 7th, 1986. When Michael Nesmith finally joined Mickey, Davy, and Peter on stage at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles.
It's always great to walk on stage and have the place go up in smoke. And I enjoyed it. I never had really quite understood why the place went so bananas for the Monkees. People go nutso. I don't know why, but it's nice to be a part of it.
Tonight was a real special moment, you know.
We can do it again. I'll do it again. Just a question of time.
Here we come.
It's not, to me, the Monkees until there's four people on stage. Mickey Dolenz, Mike Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Davy Jones. Those are the Monkees.
By 1996, 3 decades had passed since the Monkees TV series debuted. And the legendary Prefab Four were now 50-year-old men, talking about reuniting for a 30th anniversary album and tour.
We rented a rehearsal hall and jammed together for an afternoon, and whatever we had before, we still had.
The Monkees went back into the studio to begin work on their first new album in nearly 10 years. Just Us was released in the fall of '96 and was produced by the Monkees themselves.
Yes, it looks like we made it once again.
It was just the four of them. It was another attempt at Headquarters, and they played all the instruments, wrote all the songs.
25, 30 years later, they're still trying to prove themselves.
I still wish it was the way it was.
Me too.
Then in February of '97, the Monkees were back on television in an ABC special written and directed by Michael Nesmith. A month later, the Monkees kicked off their 30th anniversary tour with 12 concert dates in England.
They sold out the first night, 10,000 people. They had to add another show. But the critics were extremely harsh.
Boy, did we get lambasted by the critics.
And then Mike decided he didn't want to do it anymore.
And that's the last time they've ever appeared together in any form.
Once again, a promising comeback had come to nothing. And while the Monkees may doubt whether they will ever play together again, they have no doubt about the incredible journey they shared, the magic and the music that became the Monkees phenomenon.
We were comrades in arms. That's exactly what we were. We were never really, close, good buddies, but there was an abiding kind of love that we all had for each other, a real bond on some odd level.
Exactly.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
It's a little bit like going through a plane crash together with somebody and the relationships that you might have developed in some sort of natural disaster.
Once you're in, you're in. It's like the mafia. You want a monkey, always a monkey.
35 years after their creation, the Monkees still exist somewhere between reality and fantasy.
Come with me, leave yesterday behind. I've fought my internal battles to become someone, and how all of the Monkees fit into that in terms of my own personal history, my own journey, hero's journey. And that's, to me, the most important thing about all this. You should be a hero to yourself. And if you aren't, check it out.